Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, my colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Stefano Fanti. I'm a nuclear medicine physician in Bologna, Italy, and in the next 15 minutes I will cover the topic of therapy, vision, PSMAfore, so three of the most famous trials about the use of lutetium PSMA in prostate cancer patients. Now, these are my disclosures. As you can see, the most important one, as I used to say, is that I'm proudly a nuclear medicine physician, so you will hear a nuclear medicine perspective about those trials. As said in the lecture, we will talk about the therapy, then the vision trial and the PSMAfore, and I will briefly cover some few other trials in the same setting. As almost everybody knows, the use of lutetium PSMA has started to be proposed in patients with advanced prostate cancer, meaning metastatic castration-resistant prostate cancer, as it was for the therapy and the vision trial, but there are others ongoing trials trying to anticipate the use of lutetium PSMA before the patient gets into this advanced stage of the disease, so as first-line therapy, and now some trials even in hormone-sensitive prostate cancer. But we will talk essentially about advanced prostate cancer now. So the first trial is the very famous STheraP. It was published in the Lancet 2021. It's an Australian trial. The PI is Michael Hoffman. It's a very nice trial because it's very well designed. It's a randomized trial in which you have one arm which has been treated with lutetium PSMA 617 and the control arm is treated with cabazitaxel. So standard of care in patients that have already received another taxane. The aim of the study was, of course, comparing results of cabazitaxel versus lutetium, and the primary endpoints is the PSA response rate. Secondary endpoints, we have progression-free survival, toxicity, and a few others. Now, the trial resulted positive. You can see in the waterfall plot that the change in PSA was achieved, so we have more than 50% response in a higher rate of patients with lutetium PSMA as compared to cabazitaxel. And also regarding the progression-free survival, the trial was positive, demonstrating a better performance of lutetium PSMA over cabazitaxel. And finally, the very interesting data is that there is not only a higher PSA response, but also a fewer grade 3 or grade 4 adverse events. So the safety and tolerability of the therapy with lutetium PSMA was essentially better as compared to cabazitaxel, which is known to be a challenging therapy for the patient. So what the investigators concluded is that lutetium PSMA is a new effective class of therapy and a potential alternative to cabazitaxel. So it was probably the first RCT, very well designed and published, regarding the role of lutetium PSMA, essentially a very pioneeristic study that demonstrated the importance of using lutetium PSMA as an alternative in those patients, again, metastatic CRPC, already treated also with another taxane line, so essentially docetaxel. And this is the summary in this nice cartoon, which is showing the PSA reduction, as said, from 37 in the control arm to 66 in the lutetium arm, and progression-free survival that was definitely much better with the lutetium therapy. However, there has been some criticism, well, not really criticism, but rather some updating that was published early this year by the same author, and it's the evaluation of the overall survival. In the mature data, it was seen that overall survival was similar among patients assigned to lutetium PSMA as compared to those assigned to cabazitaxel. So essentially there was no advantage on overall survival. But in fact, the trial was not designed, was not potent enough to properly study overall survival. And now let's move to the next very famous trial, the VISION trial, which is again multicentric, in this case is international. It was published on the New England Journal of Medicine, June 2021, and presented at ASCO. The principal investigator is Oliver Sartor. Michael Morris presented that at ASCO. And it's again a nice trial, RCT. In this case, it's 2-to-1, the randomization. And in one arm, we have the standard of care plus lutetium PSMA 617. And in the control arm, we have the standard of care alone. This trial is interesting because the main objective is the overall survival, so a much better endpoint by the clinical point of view. And the primary endpoint was successful, so you see there is an advantage and a prolonged overall survival in the arm treated with lutetium PSMA. It's 15 months versus 11 months in the standard of care, and it was also observed an advantage in radiological progression-free survival you see in the graph at your right. So, what the authors concluded is that the addition of lutetium PSMA significantly extended survival among those patients which are again metastatic CRPC already treated with many treatments, so essentially it's a third line, and the toxic effect was essentially acceptable. And again, here we have the cartoon summarizing the results with the advantage in overall survival and of course also in the radiographic PFS. This has led to the incorporation of lutetium PSMA treatment into the guidelines. So these are, for example, the AIU guidelines, so European guidelines. As you can see in the last line, it's indicated, and of course the indication is the patient that we just mentioned. And the same happened for the indication of ASCO, so North American recommendation. And of course this has also led to the registration of the product first by FDA and later on by EMA. So the product was approved and registered, and definitely it's a milestone, this study, because it has led to this, meaning clinical availability of treatment with lutetium PSMA 617. But once again, we have some criticism on this trial, and essentially it's about the standard of care, because as you can see, the standard of care excluded chemo, excluded immuno, excluded radium. So essentially, there was no real life-prolonging therapy allowed in the standard of care. So that was criticized as a little weak control arm. And now let's move to the third trial we're going to cover. That's the PSMAfore. It's again, just like for the other, phase 3 randomized study. In this case, randomization is 1-to-1, and once again, we have lutetium PSMA 617, and in the control arm, we have the change of the ARPI. So essentially, the second manipulation of the androgen receptor, so switching from ABI to ENZA, essentially. And the primary endpoint was radiological PFS, and it was met, as we can see in the graph. There is an advantage of lutetium PSMA 617 over ARPI change, with an increase of the median radiological PFS from 5.6 months to 12 months, so clearly met the primary endpoint. And also an advantage in the radiographic response rate, as we see in the upper graph, and the waterfall plot again show better results regarding the decrease of PSA, with a higher percentage of decrease of more than 50% of the PSA values in the patient. What was also observed is that it doesn't translate in advantage on overall survival. That remains almost the same between the two arms and around 19 months. As said, also this trial had some criticism, and again it was about the standard of care, because the RP change is not regarded, especially in Europe, as a real alternative. A fact that has been emphasized, and I'm quoting here Vinay Prasad, is that we have to be aware that there are several trials, a relevant proportion of trials, which are using a suboptimal control arm. This is not only in genitourinary oncology, but it's quite common in oncology. And indeed, the two trials, in my opinion, the Vision and the PSMAfore, were well designed because it's almost impossible to have one single standard of care that is absolutely accepted by the entire medical oncological community, either in North America, in Europe, and in the rest of the world. We always have to deal with some compromise. And this is sort of a summary of the PSMA targeted radioligand therapy landscape. You see in red are the published data, so you see in the far right the Vision and the therapy as third line in metastatic CRPC. PSMAfore has not yet been fully published with the data, but it's coming, and many others are running and coming. So the good news is that we will have more and more data demonstrating the real usefulness of lutetium PSMA, also in second line, in first line, in CRPC, and even in earlier situation. So, for example, the PSMA addiction is running, and will be very interesting to hear the results very soon. A few more data, as I told you. Given the registration of the product, now we have real-world experience, which are very interesting and confirming the great opportunity of lutetium PSMA therapy. So, for example, this is from UCSF, and as you can see, there is 2/3 of the patients that achieved the PSA 50, so reduction of PSA values and a good response, even in patients that could not have been enrolled either in the therapy trial and in the Vision trial. So reinforcing the concept that in real world PSMA lutetium is an effective therapy. And this similar data from Europe, and in particular from Turkey, again reporting that in real world lutetium PSMA is an effective therapy for this indication in metastatic CRPC. So let's come to some conclusion regarding those three trials, which are indeed milestones in the clinical application of lutetium PSMA. It's clear that lutetium PSMA is part of theranostic, which is nuclear medicine, and it's an approach integrating diagnosis and therapy. It's used since many years, and the rationale is in vivo demonstration of the target, and lutetium PSMA is an effective theranostic approach, already approved for metastatic CRPC. What we want to see, we hope to see, is cases like this. That's a patient in our file already treated with several therapies, and a positive gallium PSMA PET treated with 4 courses of lutetium PSMA 617, and you see there is a great response by the PSA point of view, but also clinically evident, and the final value of PSA was absolutely very, very low. Here are the image, and that's the ideal setting with intense uptake at PET, decrease, and you can follow that very well with SPECT imaging and great clinical and laboratoristic response. So that's what we hope and what we can achieve with lutetium PSMA in well-selected patients. So trials like therapy, Vision, and PSMAfore have already demonstrated the efficacy of therapy, and further data are rapidly coming to establish the role of lutetium PSMA in different clinical settings in prostate cancer. Thank you very much for your attention.